Gerard, thanks for coming on the show. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself for those that don't already know you?
Thank you, Jay. My name, as you mentioned, Gerard Aartsen from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, um, where professionally, I'm still working as a teacher trainer at the Teacher Training Institute here. But for over 40 years, nearly 45 years, I've been a student uh, as well as a teacher. Well, actually, I haven't been a teacher for that long, but I've been a student of the ageless wisdom teaching for over 45 years. Um, and since 2010, I'm also an author, and I started my authorship with a book on George Adamski. George Adamski, a herald for the Space Brothers. I was fascinated by the fact that his teaching, which is the most ignored part of his mission, I believe, uh, coincides so much with the teachings that I've been studying for all these years. Um, and one thing led to another, and now I've published about 8 books. And my latest book, again, focuses on the work of George Adamski. But I'm sure we'll be getting into that later in the show.
Of course. So for those that don't know, who is George Adamski?
Good question. When I published my first book, and because I found some very interesting connections and associations between different sources. I was asked to give talks. First time was in Leeds in England, and I found that in the first couple of years, almost 90% of the audience had never heard of George Adamski. While in the 1950s, he was world famous. He went on a world lecture tour in 1959. So, very briefly, George Adamski rose to fame in the 50s for his photographs initially of very detailed photographs of spacecraft. He had done some photographs, not very detailed, of what he thought were spacecraft against the face of the moon and in space, etc., through a 6-inch telescope and a box camera, which lensless box camera that he mounted on his telescope. And some of these were published in Fate magazine. Maybe some people will have heard of that. Their website is still exists. But these were not very remarkable quality, even though they were quite unique at the time. But then came the opportunity for him to take these photographs, really detailed photographs of spacecraft, and they have been dismissed and debunked ever since. In 1953, followed by his accounts of meeting with people who stepped out of a landed craft, a scout ship, and also accounts of his journeys, his trips into space when he was invited to board some spacecraft, also in the 1950s. Now, like I mentioned, he was invited to various countries in 1959 on a world lecture tour after he published 2 books. The first was in co-authorship with the English-Irish writer Desmond Leslie, who was actually the first to outline the history of UFO sightings and ET contact in his part of the book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. And in the second part, George Adamski described his first encounter with what he called a human being from space, who identified himself as hailing from Venus. And the that was followed in 1955 by his second book on the subject, titled Inside the Spaceships. Those were the two books that shot him to fame, and they were, reprinted many times, and they were both translated into at least a dozen foreign languages. So he was world famous.
I would imagine that anyone talking about being on a spacecraft back in the 50s people would have thought that he was crazy. I mean, I've met several people who have said that now, and I've even interviewed some, but back then I bet people just thought he was nuts.
There were plenty of people who thought he was crazy and who didn't believe him. But you'd be surprised to know that there was a whole bunch of people, especially in the United States, who had similar claims and who had similar experiences. Because at the time, and many present-day UFO researchers and disclosure activists seem to forget about that. But at the time, we were living, as we are now, in this day and age, under extreme psychological stress. At the time, it was the threat of nuclear annihilation. There was the Cold War going on between the Soviet Union and the United States and their respective allies. Now, of course, the world is multipolar, with dangers lurking on every side, mostly, informed by financial interests, vying for natural resources and fighting wars by proxy, or extremists, people who believe they have the only way into the future, and they should be given all powerful rule. So yeah, we find ourselves in very similar situation now as in the 1950s. But at the time, people were under the psychological threat of a nuclear threat from United States and Soviet Union. They both were in developing new, more advanced nuclear weapons in full gear. And so there was a real threat also to the continued existence of this planet. And that is why that was one of the first reasons why the extraterrestrials decided to contact people on Earth, people without any social standing or without world fame initially, because they want us to respond to the truth of their message. They want us to respond from the heart, from a recognition of what they're saying, that's valuable and valid. So you had George Adamski, you had Truman Bethune, you had Buck Nelson, you had Howard Menger, you had a whole host of people. Some claims were false. They were jumping on the bandwagon and thinking it was a quick way to get rich. I don't believe any of these people, the genuine contactees, made any money to speak of, not even from their book sales. But there were many similar accounts from people in South America and here in Europe. We had this was before my time, obviously, but we had the Italian friendship case. And there's a very, very interesting documentary made about that, and it's available also on YouTube, called The Friendship Case. And that involved over 100 common Italians who were contacted and regularly met with people from space who were living and working in underground bases here around Italy. So yes, there was, you have the rational people who would just out of hand dismiss any kind of claim of contact with extraterrestrials. But at the time, there were, many people who were really interested in this story. Also because, yes, science, has ever since the Enlightenment has felt they have this monopoly on, description of reality. But in the reality is that science doesn't really, even astrophysics admits that it cannot point out 96% of the mass of the universe. We can only see, well, no, 90, I don't know exactly. We can only see 4 or 6% of the universe and pinpoint it, and the rest is a mystery, and they call it dark energy and dark matter. So, the scientists, there were scientists in the 50s who said, well, we have to look into this, into these claims, and what are they saying, and does it match our measurements or our our assumptions based on scientific calculations about other planets, etc. And of course, soon towards the end of the 1950s, most of them said, nah, there's no likelihood of life on planets like Venus and Mars and Saturn, planets where most of George Adamski's contacts came from. So that's when they dismissed him, and from the 1960s onward, there was in the 1950s, because of the massive interest, the governments, especially the U.S. government, had a vested interest in the public's support for their arms race with the Soviet Union. And so a concerted disinformation program was set up to debunk and ridicule the original contactees in the 1950s. And George Adamski bore most of the brunt. He's never been taken seriously since the 1960s.
Yeah, science has become its own religion at this point, in a way. So I'm less interested in whether or not these things exist, because in my opinion, they do. And I think that the evidence is out there if you genuinely look for it. And I've met so many people like yourself who have actually seen these things and studied them and have maybe not been able to prove it from the standpoint of, something that's repeatable with the scientific method that the scientific community would accept. But I think we can all accept that there's something going on here. We're being visited. There are ETs, interdimensional beings coming here. People are having contact with it and all of that. So in your research, what are these ET civilizations coming here to do primarily?
Just one minor correction, perhaps. You mentioned that I had seen them. Well, yes, like most people, I think I have seen some, inexplicable in terms of our known aviation airplanes and what have you. I have not, knowingly at least, met extraterrestrials. Just to make sure and get that out of the way.
Oh, sorry. I thought I remember hearing that you had seen one or something. So
no, I don't. No, I don't think I. At least that's not what I intended to say. In any case, the purpose of the extraterrestrials in coming here is very simply the fact that we are part of a larger whole. For the longest time, people on Earth thought that we are the center of the universe. And in many cases, many individuals at the moment still live as if they are the center of the world or the universe, and everything revolves around them. But fortunately, luckily, more and more, even scientists are recognizing that we live in a larger system, and there's many scientists even who already see that the Earth itself is like a living organism. So we are part, even living on this planet, we are part of a bigger whole, a larger whole. But the same is true on a cosmic scale. Earth is part of a larger unit, which we call the solar system. And even though most of that is still a mystery to almost all of us here on Earth, it's still a fact. It's a fact that we are part of a larger system. It's also a fact that our science is at present unable to see everything that's going on around us in space, to see that life is actually universal occurrence. And therefore, we are not able to capable of seeing and observing how life has evolved on other planets in our system. Science at least recognizes that we live in an ocean of energy, right? And this energy, I'm not a physicist. I'm not a quantum physicist or theorist. So I try to phrase this in terms that I'm familiar with, based on my study of. I do read a lot of scientific books. The energy in the universe clusters into what science recognizes as small particles, and these cluster into larger objects, planets, but at the basis of all these little clusters of energy is consciousness. Every tiny cluster of energy is informed by consciousness, which is the real fundamental nature of reality in the universe. And that's how everything is connected on a scale that we and I mean especially our scientists are not yet aware of, even though there's a growing movement in the scientific community to explore that part of reality. And it's generally referred to as post-materialist science, which holds that the materialist science, which takes particles, atoms, and the little bits that make up atoms as the ultimate reality that we live in. Post-materialist science says, but it does not account for consciousness in humans or between humans, outside of humans, near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences. So the extraterrestrials who come here, they are more advanced than we are on the path of evolution. We are all involved, engaged on a journey of evolution in terms of consciousness. And this happens in major cycles. We are now at the end of one such cycle. And because of our technological abilities and our, especially the weaponry that we built with that, we are at a particularly dangerous phase in our evolution, in the transition from one cycle into the next, where we, if the majority of humanity were able to recognize that we are part of a greater whole, then we wouldn't be in such a dire and dangerous situation. But we've been raised, we've been educated, we've been indoctrinated in a way to think of ourselves as separate units. Me separate from you, and separate from everybody else, separate from the planet even, so we can do what we think we need to do, exploit and discard natural resources, as if it doesn't have an effect. But because we've been treating each other and the planet that way, with such immense levels of selfishness and disregard for life, and lack of understanding, honestly, about life and reality, we've maneuvered ourselves into this very dangerous situation where it's almost like, you know, we're pitted against each other and ready to kill each other and blow up the planet in the process. And the extraterrestrials, the early contactees of the 1950s, referred to them as the space brothers and sisters, because that's really what they are. You know, they are human beings from other planets. They may look different from us because the physical conditions on their planets are different. And when they show themselves, very often they will, you know, take on a form that we would recognize. But on their planets, they may look quite different, even though, you know, they have a trunk, they have 4 limbs and a head, and you know, so the basic structure is the same in all of the human kingdom across the universe. But you know, there's little variations, just as there are among humans here on Earth. Yeah, they are our brothers and sisters, and they are here out of concern for us, so that we don't blow ourselves up, but also concern for the integrity of the solar system, because should we, God forbid, blow up the planet, that would set back the evolution of the solar system, you know, by perhaps millions of years, because we are an integral part, and we are on that path of evolution, or path of return to back to the source of consciousness. And I realize, to people with a more scientific inclination, this will sound, you know, dreamy or whatever, but yes, that's the reality that I live in any case.
Yeah, I'm not really too worried about the people who are steeped in material sciences, because we're in a territory that's completely beyond that. You know, we might not necessarily be able to prove it with, you know, technological devices or mechanisms, but we all know that there's something going on here. So you mentioned that we're sort of entering a new age, and I've heard you talk about this a few times. I think it's this Age of Aquarius, which is an astrological thing. So we're coming out of the Pisces, right? Now, can you sort of describe what that is, and then what the transition is, and then what we're going into?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, because that's, you know, that's really what's going on at the moment, and it's also what George Adamski wrote about on many, and spoke about on many occasions. The Age of Pisces. See, the fact that we live in an energetic universe means that as the solar system moves across the heavens, now it comes into a different alignment with a new constellation in what we call the zodiac, every roughly 2,500 years, sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more. And each of these cosmic sources have their own energy and give us the, or how to say that?
Maybe idiosyncrasies or
No,
characteristics?
I mean, the energies saturate the solar system, and therefore also our planet, with their energies, which have their own characteristics, you know, and or have their effects based on which, through our evolution of the evolution of our civilizations, we develop certain characteristics as human beings, you know, in the human kingdom. During the Age of Pisces, which was inaugurated, every age is inaugurated by a teacher, and the Age of Pisces was inaugurated by Jesus, who acted as the mouthpiece, so to speak, for the world teacher, as they are known in the teachings that I've studied, the Ageless Wisdom teachings. Yeah, briefly, I don't know if you're familiar with the Ageless Wisdom teachings. They were first reintroduced to a modern audience in the late 19th century by Madame Blavatsky. Also much maligned and ridiculed and dismissed. There was a report in 1885 which dismissed her as a fraud. And interestingly, the same organization that commissioned the report retracted that report a full century later in 1986, saying it was based on faulty research and false assumptions. That aside, Madame Blavatsky reintroduced the Ages Wisdom teachings to a modern audience in mainly her books Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. Her work was expounded on in many books by Alice Ann Bailey in the between 19 and 1949. And also in what is known as the Agni Yoga series by Helena Rerik, a Russian disciple. And most recently, it was the Scottish esotericist Benjamin Crane who added much elaboration on the teachings of especially Alice Bailey and Madame Blavatsky. So these are the Ages Wisdom teachings. And according to the Ages Wisdom teaching, every cycle is inaugurated by a teacher. And I need to make another step back because the teaching is protected and given out by a group of people who have gone ahead of us on the path of evolution. Out of the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and the animal kingdom has evolved the human kingdom, and we can see progressing, ascending degrees of consciousness in these subsequent kingdoms in nature. But the evolution of consciousness doesn't stop with the human kingdom. It hasn't stopped. It has continued, and out of the human kingdom has evolved what we refer to as the spiritual kingdom, also known as the kingdom of souls or the masters of wisdom, and the Great White Brotherhood. There's many, many different names, and also many, many fantasies, from people who believe they belong to it or who are in communication, contact with these masters. But the masters have been very elusive since the destruction of Atlantis, the last bit of Atlantis 100,000 years ago. But because of this unique time in human history, they have prepared and they are on their way back into the everyday life of humanity. And they started with the reintroduction of their teachings in the late 19th century by Madame Blavatsky. Okay, so I'm sorry for this quite lengthy introduction. So every new cycle gives new opportunities for humanity because we are on this path of return in terms of consciousness. Over the cycle of Pisces in the past 2,000 years, we have acquired, as human beings, have acquired the characteristics of individuality and idealism. And people who are familiar with the Bible in whatever way they interpret it, they will may remember stories where Jesus challenged the religious authorities of his time, and taught people to think for themselves and not to accept authority, just without questioning or without not thinking for themselves. Of course, everyone will be aware of the fact that when Jesus was challenged, he refused to provide proof, and he was killed. He was crucified. And so were many of his followers, his immediate disciples, etc. So there you have the qualities of individuality and idealism. And over the past 2,000 years, these have sort of crystallized. The quality of individuality is a very valuable and important characteristic for human beings in for our future advancement. But it's not the only characteristic that we should value. And at the moment, they've sort of amalgamated into individualism, where individual responsibility seems to have morphed into getting whatever you can just for yourself and forgetting about everything else. Whereas there's a very well-known teaching in every single world religion: treat others the same you want to be treated. And this can be seen in every world religion, but also in how in the recommendations of a political report that was commissioned in 1980 or written in 1980 in order to with suggestions to solve the world crisis, even in 1980 by the Commission Brandt Committee. So it's enshrined in United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the Article 25, which guarantees adequate food and shelter and medicine, education for every human being. So it's a general realization deep inside us that we share among everyone. Except it seems to have gotten lost, especially in the last 40 years, due to neoliberalism and hypercapitalism and commodification of every basic human need, so that in most places of the world we now have to pay for clean drinking water, something that was just a universal availability everywhere around the world just a few hundred years ago. So these things have these unmissable, these required characteristics that we have developed over the past 2,000 years have now crystallized into something that has become dangerous, that is endangering our lives and our existence on this planet. The Age of Aquarius has as its tones, as its characteristics, synthesis and unity. And these are things that we need to look for. And when you look around the world at the moment, around the planet, it's obviously clear, it's strikingly clear that is what is lacking at the moment in every field of human endeavor where there are crises. And there are crises not only in the war arenas, but also in the political systems. The political system in the United States is not just the United States, but it's it's glaringly obvious there. But in every country, it's not working anymore, at least not for the people. Political systems are working for the very rich, but not for the common people. There's crises in financial, economic systems, social systems, educational systems everywhere. And it's because we are, we have this false sense of separation, and that's the danger of this period in time, this juncture in human history, where we move away from the old energies of Pisces into the new energies of Aquarius. It's something we can't do anything about because the solar system is making that movement along the heavens. And so the energies impinging on our system and on our planet have changed and are now, according to Benjamin Graham, who's the latest contributor to the Ageless Wisdom teachings as we have them now, they're now stronger than the energies of Pisces. And this makes for a huge crisis because, in every respect, because all our structures and our way of thinking are based on the old energies, and there are no new structures in place yet. So this is where our present predicament comes from. And this is why the extraterrestrials are here, to answer your question finally, are here to help us navigate our way through this predicament. And they are here also in support of this major event of the teachers of humanity, the masters of wisdom, with the world teacher at their head, returning into the modern world, where for the first time in many thousands of years, everyone in the world will realize, wait, there's more to life than just being born and dying and trying to fight for your place under the sun. In the meantime, there's actually a whole divine, so to speak, cosmic process going on that we are not aware of, because our educational systems are not aware of it, our science is not aware of it, so we haven't been taught about it. And that is what these teachers, the masters of wisdom, and also the space brothers and sisters, are here to remind us of and to help us find our way back.
Yes, I call these outdated systems institutions of enslavement, because that's essentially what they do. When you look at the banking system and the political system, it's designed to divide people, to atomize them, to create fear, and then from that standpoint, it can control them. And when you look at the banking system, or even just at the individual level, you have usurious levels of interest on credit cards, and amortizing notes,
student loans.
Yeah, student loans, perfect example. People are going to be paying those off for their entire lives. I mean, that's indentured servitude. So yes. I would call that a institution of enslavement. And what I see happening is that all of these institutions, all of these outdated systems are going to be radically disrupted. And the people that control them are going to not like that. And they may cause additional chaos as they are weeded out of power. But the new systems that are coming in are more, they don't take away individual freedoms and liberties, but they also add more of a collective mindset to it. So rather than, basically what I'm saying is that the way forward is not a certain politician or a political party or an economic system, capitalism, socialism, whatever. It's an evolution of consciousness where people get to the point where they build a business, and they're incentivized to build a business because, yes, they can profit and they can enjoy the fruits of their labor. But the primary chief aim of that business is to actually help people above just products and services, but to help people in a way that it's sort of what social enterprise does. Which is a type of business that goes above and beyond just providing good products and services. It helps the community. And we see this with companies that, donate one item. For every time you buy an item, they donate an item to a underprivileged, community or something like that. Things like that, I think, are going to become more common. And it's not just going to be in the corporate sector. It's going to be all throughout societies. As these systems that we have will start to become more like symbiotic or something like that, where, if you look at a tree in the woods, it produces an abundance of acorns, and the acorns create more trees, but they also feed the animals. They also and then the tree provides a home for certain animals. It's more, everything's integrated. So I think that's kind of what we're moving into.
Yes, and community driven.
Yeah.
And I very much agree with what you just said. It's not about one particular political ideology or anything. It's not about uniformity. Unity is not about uniformity. Many people are afraid of unity when they speak of unity, like the United Nations. Oh, there's going to be a one world government, etc. Well, there may be eventually, but that doesn't mean that we all need to dress and think and look the same. It's more of a community-based approach, where the greater good is not sacrificed to the greed of the economically or financially powerful, as it is at the moment. At the moment, the planet is up for grabs, and whoever has the biggest shovel will get away with the biggest share of and a slice of the pie, and it leaves the majority of people on this planet in destitute circumstances. Not to speak of our own environments being completely polluted and destroyed.
And I think people are starting to wake up to all of you mentioned the financial interest behind these conflicts. There's a lot of conflicts going on right now, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, all that stuff. And I think people are starting to realize that these are not really wars that represent the will of the people. They're more so wars between governments and transnational organizations, non-state actors, things like that have nothing to do with individuals. It's all about enriching themselves. It's all about, greed, maybe power, things like that. So I think
at the heart, I think it's this struggle between the forces of materialism and the forces of light. And the forces of light being the forces who are looking for a way for humanity to move forward as a whole, and who recognize humanity as a whole. Whereas the force of materiality are, as you say, they're feeding on atomizing and separating people and individuals and pitting them against each other. Whereas cooperation and sharing and working towards social justice and recognition that the planet and its natural resources belong to everyone on this planet, regardless of the color of their skin or the size of their bank account or the place on earth where they were born. And we need to work towards a situation where everyone, as I just mentioned, as is stated in the Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has adequate housing, adequate food, adequate medical care and education, whether you're man, woman, or child, because that's the only way forward. We have one planet on which this species with this particular carbon-based makeup can survive. This is where we originate. It's not to say that we are limited to this planet, because if we work together, if we unite and work together and flourish together, we will be joining the space brothers and sisters in exploring the universe, and going to the stars. But this is our basis. This is where we originate, and unless we work together, unless we cooperate and share, we will destroy each other. And that's the major lesson that we need to learn this particular critical time in history.
Yeah, there are more than enough resources to go around for everybody to
Absolutely.
have a great life. But the problem is we have, as you mentioned, all these different warring ideologies, and ultimately this stems from ignorance. If people were aware of
Absolutely.
who and what they really were and what was actually available, we could all come together. I mean, we would be traveling the stars by now if this stuff, if we weren't fighting each other over stupid ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that has to do, I think, with the suppression of technologies and the awareness of ET visitations.
Absolutely.
By our governments.
Yeah. You may not be aware, but George Adamski was one of the individuals involved in the initial outreach from the extraterrestrials to Earth governments, who offering a way out of nuclear predicament and saying, well, if you abolish your nuclear efforts, we will help you with spacefaring technology. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. We would be, already well on our way into the solar system, exploring the solar system far more in depth than we are now with some I mean, it's impressive, everything that we're doing in space, but it's nothing compared to what we could have been doing. But unfortunately, this offer was rejected, simply because of these warring ideologies that you mentioned. The capitalism versus socialism. Whereas in a healthy system, there's room for free enterprise, but there's also regulations that make sure that nobody lacks, and everybody has sufficient has the basic needs fulfilled in order to work towards fulfillment of their individuality.
Now, you mentioned that there are star systems or something like that. The Earth itself, the whole solar system, is going through some kind of change, and that lifts the tide, which lifts everybody on the Earth. And this is the entering of this new age into Aquarius. I was listening. Do you know Chris and Ryan Bledsoe? Have you heard of them?
I've recently heard of Chris Bledsoe. Yes.
Okay. So they were talking.
Did he write a book?
Yeah, I think so. But they had like 15 years ago all these visitations, and then they've been having visitations maybe daily since then. And they're not necessarily craft, but they show up as orbs.
Yeah.
And sometimes beings as well. And I believe one of them has been even taken on and had an experience with them and all of this stuff. But they were saying that something about the star Regulus over the Sphinx or something, and when that happens, there's some sort of celestial like energy wave coming towards the Earth or something. And maybe it's the same thing that you're talking about, but do you know anything about that? Yeah.
No, not specifically. See, there's over the years there have been many explications of how this transition will work. And the truth is there are continuous energy waves. There's a continuous and growing stream of cosmic energy entering the solar system and the planet. What has kept us so far from actually manifesting these energies into practical solutions is humanity's ignorance. You mentioned it, and the fact that we refuse to give up. We, humanity in quotation marks, refuse to give up what we think is our most prized position, which is our separate individuality. We refuse to look beyond our own immediate individual interests, personal interests. And as long as we refuse to give that up, we will increase the danger that we've moved ourselves in. There's something else you mentioned. The people have literally no idea how many people around the world are having experiences, are being contacted, or having experiences of an extraterrestrial nature. Most people, because of the general dismissiveness, they refrain from talking about it. Some people are brave enough to speak about it. So you have Chris Bledsoe now, and there's been many other people, and one after the other have been ignored or dismissed by the media or the people around them, ridiculed. But it's unstoppable, and the extraterrestrials have been working ever since their more visible and visual return at the end of World War II, when the first atomic bombs were exploded, to make themselves known, without forcing themselves on us, because that would create a panic. They are more evolved than we are in most, especially the ones who are coming here. There are also extraterrestrial species who are less evolved, even also in our solar system, But measures have been taken so that they cannot interfere with the crisis that humanity and planet Earth are going through. And the people from other planets who do come here, Venus, Mars, Saturn mainly, Jupiter as well, they are here in order to support, as I mentioned, this transition and the return into the everyday world of the world teacher and the masters of wisdom, the elder brothers of humanity. So we have the space brothers and the elder brothers of humanity. And, these are momentous times for humanity. So, but unless humanity has to do it, and the space brothers are not forcing their reality on us, that would be infringing our free will. The masters of wisdom, the elder brothers of humanity, are not forcing their reality upon us, because that would be infringing our free will. Nobody's going to force us to accept a new mindset about sharing and cooperating towards justice, social justice. Because if it doesn't come from the heart, it won't last. And before you know it, we'll be at each other's throats again. We have to realize that these are necessary steps that we have to take through the changing of our political and economic and every other system in the world. And that has to come from us. They're here to inspire, and they're here to help whenever we are ready to receive their help. But we have to do it. It's not something that is going to fall out of the heaven with a wave of energy or with an invasion of spacecraft. No, it doesn't work that way.
Is this the same thing as what people are calling the Great Awakening?
I don't know what people mean by the Great Awakening, but if I know that that's what it's needed, the Great Awakening, but I don't know exactly what is meant by that. But humanity needs to wake up to its true spiritual nature, and through that awakening to our true nature, we will realize we are all connected, and through that realization, we will be inspired to work towards restoring the planet to health, towards restoring right human relations, making sure that no one goes to bed hungry. Millions of people every year, millions of people die unnecessarily of hunger, or simple basic medical procedures or medicines. Every year we celebrate the abolition of slavery, and we live in a world where there's how many were there? 50 million people living and working in slavery. We have no real sense of who we are, and we have no real sense in what kind of world we actually live in. We live in a fantasy. We live in an illusion that is kept intact through the corporate media, and it seems as if people are just too complacent to look beyond what's on that television or YouTube screens in the evening after a long day at mostly useless work, because the majority of jobs at the moment are completely useless. In terms of what they contribute to to the greater good and the progress of human civilization. So they just want to be lulled into this sleep and to believe that, as long as I wake up the next morning and I have my breakfast and I can go to work and pay the rent, then I will be fine. But we're not going to be fine unless everybody is going to be fine.
Yeah, as long as their sports team is available on the television, and the entertainment is in constant supply, then everything is good. And you mentioned slavery. What we don't realize in our modern societies is that this is still happening to this day. There are people who are slaves all throughout the world, in China, in parts of Africa, and
even
that
in Europe and the US.
Yeah.
We don't want to see it, but it's there.
And in a way, depending to a much lesser degree, the average citizen may also be what you might call an indentured servant, which it's a type of slavery.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, we need to wake up and figure out what's going on here and try to solve this. Why is it so important that we integrate all of this ourselves? You mentioned the infringement of free will. Why is it so important that they don't infringe on free will and that we figure it out ourselves?
See, if someone comes along, for instance, in the 1950s, if the Queen of England or the Catholic Pope or the President of the US would have stepped forward and said, there's people from space visiting, everybody would have accepted it. If they had said, and this is their message, millions of people would have accepted it, because despite the characteristic of individuality, which has been added to the human tapestry of characteristics, many of us still have this herd mentality. It's not some evolution doesn't happen for all of humanity at the same time. There's always an avant-garde, a vanguard, and the masses, they follow, and that's the natural course of things. So millions and millions of people would be ready to accept whatever the Pope or the President or Queen was going to say, and that's not how things work. If we want to change, if we want fundamental change, it has to come from ourselves. Radical change starts here, not with my neighbor, but with me. Unless I do something to change, nothing will change. If I change something in the way I act, in the way I interact with the world and the people around me, that will have a ripple effect. And through that ripple effect, and it's strengthening when other people make changes because they feel from their heart and they understand from their understanding that this is necessary, then it will have a lasting effect. If it is imposed, anything that is imposed will ignite a reaction. There will be resistance, and if you want lasting change, resistance is not going to help.
I agree 100%. And it also can't be imposed by other people. I mean, if we all, if you and I decide that, the world needs to be more loving and collectively minded, and then we go out,
we'll take our guns and force people.
We take our guns and force people to be more loving. That's just as bad. So what needs to happen is that every individual needs to, not everyone, but the majority of people need to individually awaken, and then collectively, in a decentralized manner, we all do it at the same time. And the rising tide lifts all the ships, exactly, as they say.
What's interesting, you say a majority, but just a few years ago, a sociologist in California, through research, found that, in fact, it only needs to be 3.5% of the population in any country to affect real fundamental change.
Correct.
That's an amazing insight, and that is so hopeful also, that extends so much hope, because it shows, and we know there are so many people like us who understand the needs of the time, and so far seem to have failed to unite and organize to bring about this wave of change as an illustration and as an example for the larger masses to follow. But the awareness is there, and I think the numbers are there. And I think that is also evinced in the fact that the Masters of Wisdom and the World Teacher and the Space Brothers are all here in support of this historic step in our conscious evolution. And of course, it's the power that of the vested interests that hold us, that are still keeping a tightening hold on us. But it will burst. The unfortunate thing is, because they've managed, and we have allowed that they managed to keep that hold on us for so long, the bursting open may be more painful than it needed to be maybe 40 years ago, but it will still happen.
Yes, I agree. These are great topics, and I'm glad to speak with you about it and share it with others. So we're coming up on an hour here. So I got one more question, and then we'll talk about some of your books. Have you heard of the concept of starseeds and hybrids, where people have maybe ET DNA or something like that, and that can lead to them having maybe more awareness or abilities or something?
Well, yes, I've heard of the concepts. I'm not particularly familiar with the specifics, especially starseeds. I don't know what that means.
It's a little more
I
out
know, I know there are cosmic entities, you might say, incarnations of cosmic consciousness, cosmic levels of consciousness. In Indian culture, civilization, throughout history, you'll find avatars, and of course many imposters who would like to be seen as avatars and make a business out of it. But there are also genuine avatars. And they also come here in support of the progress of human civilization. So I would think of that as a starseed, but that's probably not what is meant. And the other term, hybrids. Yeah, I don't know. I know that extraterrestrials, some extraterrestrials take incarnation on our planet, and
yeah, that's what I meant.
sometimes they will marry perhaps with Earth humans. If that makes you a hybrid, I don't know. The human soul, has its own stage. Everyone is at their own stage in the evolution of consciousness. And yes, it can be given a boost by some kind of blessing, energetic stimulus, but it's mostly the work that we do in incarnation, that we do in order to progress in terms of service to the world, service to others, in our jobs and in our lives, in our families. And that's what propels us forward. These experiences, we make mistakes, we fall, we may have killed people in a past life, we may have fought wars, we may have been kings, we may have suppressed people or liberated people. All these things have brought us to the point where we are now, and our soul stores the vibration, the frequency of vibration that we have reached in our particular individual journey on that path of return. And the soul chooses the circumstances for its next birth. And if the soul chooses to be born out of the union of perhaps an incarnated extraterrestrial and a human being, an Earth human, then it will do so, because that coincides with the frequency that it has reached, and that it seeks for its next incarnation from where it may proceed onward. So hybrids I don't know. It's yeah, anything is possible, I guess, in this universe.
Yeah, that's what I meant when you started talking about it, is that I guess they can take an incarnation in a physical form as a human here, and I guess maybe that ET is out there in a craft or something, or on another planet or whatever, and they're just waiting for their soul to come back or something. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I mean that's more or less what I meant by the hybrid, I think. But what are some of the practices that people can do? You mentioned the work that people do here. What are some of the practices that people can engage in that will elevate their consciousness and help the collective of humanity? Meditation, prayer, things like that.
Yes, meditation absolutely always helps. And especially in this day and age, but in fact, at any time in human history, service, serve as many people as you can. It's amazing, what George Adamski has taught and what has been ignored since he was active. But he said on several occasions, serve as many people as you can. And that is what will help the world, and that's what will help you forward. It will expand your consciousness, and that's the best thing you can do for humanity. Apart from meditation and service, that's really the way forward. Don't be focused on accruing wealth for yourself or be concerned with your own security. You'll be taken care of if you take care of the world, so to speak. And you can't carry the weight and the misery of the world on your shoulders, because that will crush you. So another thing is to serve from a center of hope and expectancy. Know that there are these advanced consciousnesses, the space brothers, humanity's older brothers, the world teacher, who are waiting behind the scenes, and not waiting, they're active. They're active in many ways that none of us have any idea about. Supporting, keeping up this planet, and supporting people's hope. And if we realize that they are here in support of this difficult time in human history, then that should give us every reason to be hopeful and to be actively serving the planet and the progress of humanity.
That's great. So if people want to reach out to you, I know you've written several books. Do you guys have like a website or social media that you want to direct people to?
Yes, I have a website where I announce new books, and where my previous books are listed, and people can check what they are about before they decide to buy them. The address is bgapublications.nl. It's a Dutch website, but it's in English. So it has several resources. There's a free ebook on one of my books, Before Disclosure. I'm also on Facebook by my name. As far as I know, I don't do much on Facebook, but I also announce, new interviews there and new publications. On my website, there's also a contact form, so people can click a link there and email me if they want to reach out. Yes, and my latest book is of course also on my website, and all my books are available through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other major online booksellers. My latest book is called The Adamski Book of UFO-UAP Disclosure. I think I made it, but I still think it's amazing. It's astonishing to see how much of what George Adamski said in the 1950s and wrote is now being confirmed by scientists, by the military, through the admissions from the Pentagon and some whistleblowers. Scientists are mentioned, but also disclosure activists. They look up the old archives and they find stuff that was suppressed by the officials, but that was also already um, um, spoken about or written about by George Adamski. And I make it very visual in my book. For instance, the iconic image of this craft that was taken by the infrared onboard camera on a US Navy fighter jet, looks very similar to a very early photograph made by George Adamski. There's a professor now, Stanford professor, who was interviewed, and the interview is also on YouTube, showing materials allegedly related to UFO sightings. And he's been analyzing these materials and finding that they are indeed, well, he refrains from stating these are alien materials, but he says there are some odd things about them. And George Adamski had very similar materials in the 1950s and had them analyzed. And the findings he was not allowed to publish. George Adamski, of course, claimed contact with people from space. And one of the things I shared with you is an overview of confirmations from scientists who have said, just spoken out saying, yes, there is contact with people from space. So that's being confirmed. It goes on the paradigm shift, which is basically what we've been talking about in the past hour. That was already mentioned by George Adamski. He says the main thing is not the sources or me or people's experiences. The main thing is what is transpiring in the world today. And he mentioned the military industrial complex 6 years before Dwight Eisenhower did it in his farewell speech. It's amazing. So I would, if people want to know about disclosure and what's actually known, or what we do know, but what is not being acknowledged yet, I would say they read that book, the Adamski book of UFO/UAP disclosure.
Well, Gerard, these are very important topics, and I wish I could talk to you for another hour, but I have to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be happy to be back anytime you